Hey, all you Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think fixing our workplace can fix our world, we got a real treat for you today. We have the one and only Doug. We got the one and only Matt Kelly. So let's get a master emoji explosion to get started. We're going to be talking about mastering the language of audits. Nobody likes to get audited. Maybe you do. But nobody likes to get audited. It's something, it's the reality that we have to deal with. But we are going to be talking about how we can use audits to our advantage. They're widely misunderstood, and this misunderstanding, I think, can lead to the process being a little bit harder than it needs to be. So you don't have to be a CPA to be here. You just need to be somebody who wants to understand them, and you get to meet some people that actually can explain them. So we are going to run through a couple of quick announcements. As always, we're already up to almost 700 emojis. Last Tuesday, we had a phenomenal episode with the one and only Kaveni Wong, and we broke a new record for a Tuesday, over 7,000 emojis. Yeah, play it. We got a new soundboard. We got Marina on the soundboard. Okay, so we are upgrading everything around here. So we can't let Tuesday have all the fun. We got to break some new records ourselves. Tons of resources out there. If you're not feeding your mind, you are withering on the vine. So check out the Great Women in Compliance podcast. There was a great new episode last week, not just because I was the man on the street, but there's so much thought leadership out there. We have to continue to feed our brains, continue to feed this goal-seek mechanism. Drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. Like we say every week, your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. And tell us where you're coming in from today. I love seeing everybody from across the world, every single week, every Tuesday and Thursday here. If you have not read this book yet from the one and only Reed Blackman, now is your time to win a copy. We're giving away 5 copies today of the Ethical Nightmare Challenge. We had him on launch day a couple of Tuesdays back. So if you have not seen that episode, 2X that while you're doing the dishes or while you're driving home. You can find that on YouTube on the official Ethico channel. And this book has a phenomenal framework that is extremely dynamic. We had an event in DC that Matt Kelly hosted, the best in the industry, the best in the game. There, I said it. And Matt interviewed Reed at a beautiful dinner that we had at a restaurant there in DC. We were talking about this concept of how, our AI governance can't really keep pace with the pace of change, all the different use cases of AI inside of our organization. So if you're thinking about AI, if you are thinking about how to better govern AI in your organization, this is a book to pick up or win today. If you have not downloaded our benchmark report, definitely hit the download button there. Skim through that. AI, the biggest takeaways from that. Or you can check out our replay on our YouTube channel. Next Tuesday, we have the one and only Leslie Bowles on, and we're going to be going through the healthcare version of our benchmark report. So if you're a healthcare compliance professional and you'd like to see how you benchmark against others in your industry or others in your subcategory, you'll definitely want to check that out. But I encourage you to download this. We've gotten more positive feedback about our benchmark report this year than any year before. And that's because it's chock full of tips on how to improve. If you are in Boston, Matt, I hope you're going to be there. If you're in Boston, we're going to be at the Opal Conference. We're going to be talking about a couple of sessions. If you'd like to show up, Ethico 50 for 50% off because we love you. But this is going to be a great conference. Keep these round of applause coming, okay? I love it. We're going to be there in a few weeks, so definitely check out this Opal Conference, Compliance in the Age of AI, if you're in town or want to visit sunny Boston in the spring. If you've been struggling with policy management, we got a great answer for you. Policy Plus has just launched. We're having tons of demos, tons of great feedback from folks who are getting into the system and seeing what its capabilities are, because newsflash, it was built by people like you for people like you. So I'm going to share you some of these cool takeaways with the silky voice of Chase. Chase is going to listen to Chase's silky voice.
Your policy program has a lot of moving parts. Ethico keeps them all in view. Every approval, every attestation, every deadline in one dashboard. Start a new policy, and before you type a word, Ethico checks whether it already exists. Build it your way. Upload, write, link, or choose from a template library. Define your properties or let AI autofill to save you time. It reads your document and suggests the metadata for you. One click to save, straight to your policy library, a single source of truth for all your internal documents. Find anything instantly, even if a keyword is buried deep inside a document. Keep it organized with custom categories and nested folders. Filter by anything, owner, department, status, and more. Ready for review? Send it. Reviewers are notified immediately. Configure your review process, set deadlines, and ensure nothing falls through the cracks. Every audit trail, version history, and acknowledgement report is ready for you to export the moment you need it. One platform for every policy, every approval, every attestation. Ethico. Love your work.
Amazing. So if you'd like to learn some more about that, have a no pitch zone kind of demo just to see what else is out there, reach out to us or drop a one in the chat and we'll go ahead and reach out to you. Finally, before I pass it on over to our amazing guests, I want you guys to open up a new tab on your browser right now. Go over to Radical Compliance. And if you're not following Radical Compliance, you don't care about ethics, okay? You don't care about compliance. There, I said it. This is my favorite blog. Matt Kelly is absolutely phenomenal. Amazing content, amazing voice. He's the voice of compliance. They don't call him the coolest guy in compliance for nothing. So go to Radical Compliance, sign up for the newsletter. A great new series has just concluded with the one and only Tina Tolliver that I would encourage you to read. It's a 3-part series, but this should be your homepage. All right, with that, I'm going to pass it on over to Matt Kelly and to Doug Heilman. How's it going, gentlemen?
Going well, Nick. Thank you very much for that introduction. I know that we are here today to talk about audits and how they work and how you, the compliance team, might be on the receiving end of an audit, how you are supposed to deal with these auditors. Who are these people? What do they want? How do they work? And so, Doug Heilman, I know you're going to walk us through all of this, and I am largely going to let you drive the show, Doug. And then Nick and I may occasionally pepper you with some questions. But of course, if you all have questions or comments yourself, you're happy to put them in the attendee chat, and then we will pose them to Doug and chew over them as quick as we can. But Doug, if you want to take it away, go for it.
Let's do it. Happy to be here. I tell you, it's a real privilege to be part of this session and working with Nick and with Matt and the folks at Ethico. I tell you, I've been involved, a little origin story on how we got here. I'm a participant in this almost every Thursday whenever I can. Ethico started their MBA series a few Tuesdays ago. I have an MBA, but I thought, let's tune in and see what's going on. It's really good reminders for compliance professionals and anyone dealing with compliance. And I raised my hand and said, audits are really part of a business. We should learn a little more about audits. And that curricula was pretty well set. It's amazing. So we're here today as a module on audits. It's a privilege to be in with these folks and to follow in the footsteps of Ellen Hunt, Mary Shirley, Hema, the guests before. They're all one-name celebrities like Cher and Reba. So here I am, and it's a privilege to be here to learn more about audits. Audits are a fact of life, and a lot of people in compliance, you may commission an audit, you may be audited, as Matt referenced. A lot of times in the world of compliance, you are presented with an audit that's done by somebody for a party you want to do business with, and you're expected to rely upon it. But it's my experience that people just don't really understand audits. They're intimidated by them. But if you even just learn the terms and you learn how to navigate the world of auditing, it can empower you so much to get a lot more out of audits and be skeptical of even an audit report. So here's my objectives for today. And no self-respecting consultant does a session without a disclaimer saying that this does not establish a consulting relationship, and caveat emptor. But I begin this with some premises that everybody wants an audit of somebody else. See, you get audited. I don't want to get audited. Audits are misunderstood. And if you knew more about audits, then it wouldn't be that intimidating, and maybe you can get something out of it. So that's where I'm starting from. And an audit is really just a structured exercise to compare some actual to some standard and look for gaps. Do they match or do they not match? The whole point is to look for gaps, because the thing that you pick to get audited must be important, or you wouldn't bother sponsoring the audit or having it done. And in the audit world, we say sometimes that an audit is like a snapshot. It's good for a point in time. And many of us have had some fun with those pictures in the back of magazines, like circle the 5 difference between the picture on the left.
I love highlights. Yeah.
So on Ethico at highlights, here's 2 pictures, and maybe in the chat people can find 5 differences between these 2 pictures. I have to give a shout out while we're doing this to a store called Pride's in Kansas City. I was just there. If you want anything for a kitchen, they are the place. So they had, I love sock monkeys. They had sock monkey puppet there. I had to strike a pose with him, and I made 5 differences in these 2 pictures. So some of them will come in. Yeah.
Doug, let me ask the key question. Are there only 5 things, or are there more than 5, and I just can find any 5? Because I think I found at least 4 or 5.
Well, I made 5 changes, and sometimes AI will make some other changes on their own, which is, again, like you have to watch AI. So there could be more than 5. I know there are at least 5. And when you find gaps in an audit, this is a fun exercise, but it's also like, well, which gaps are important? And it depends upon who's looking at the audit and why the audit was commissioned. So on the right, I began with the picture on the left. On the right, one of those mugs on the back is now blue. It's changed color. So does that make a big difference or not? I don't know. I've got the baseball cap on, and if I want to look cool, well, then that's really important. I have a short sleeve shirt instead of a long sleeve shirt. It doesn't matter. If you're working retail, you want to make sure the shelves are stocked. So you look at that bookcase on the right and you've been cleaned out. Well, you can't sell something on an empty shelf. And if you haven't put on your T-shirt that says "I love Ethico," that's a problem. So that's a major issue. So you look at the things, the actual and the comparison, find the differences, and say, well, which one matters? So let's move on to some key terms. An audit I just described in kind of layman's terms. You will also hear the term assurance, that the CPAs in particular will use this and say, well, we're doing assurance on the financials. We're doing assurance on these processes. Other auditors, I'm not a CPA. I've worked with a lot of CPAs on financial audits and internal audits and the like. When they talk assurance and audit, it's okay to ask, well, what do you mean by that? In doing research for this, I've asked the question on AI and Google search, and there's a few articles, and they don't all quite say the same thing. A lot of them are by CPAs, and if you have people audit something else, like terms to compliance, contract provisions in a supply chain, they're probably not CPAs. So they're using these terms kind of interchangeably, but it's worth doing a timeout and say, well, what exactly do you mean by this? Assurance is a subset of audit. Audit is a subset of assurance. It's out there kind of different ways. 2 terms to pay attention to, though, are limited assurance and reasonable assurance. In my world, which includes carbon accounting and publishing greenhouse gas emissions inventories, there's a California law coming into play. There's an EU disclosure and reporting requirement coming into play. And over time, the greenhouse gas emissions inventories will require limited assurance, and that will scale up to reasonable assurance. In simple terms, a limited assurance involves the structured process to look at documents information, to look at what the standard is supposed to be, and at the end of it, the conclusion says, well, we did all this effort and we did not find anything that is materially wrong. So you're looking for the glaring errors. Reasonable assurance is the next step up that says, well, we did all this work and we're pretty confident that things are right. It's a lot more effort. You'll see reasonable assurance is what the accountants do for financial statements, because you got to make sure that's right. They're not just glaringly not wrong. But those two concepts, you'll see that's in a nutshell what the differences are. Assessment, review, advisory, evaluation. There are a lot of other terms that are used for some kind of comparison or some kind of review. They may not rise to the level of an audit, where there are people with credentials, there is a structured process, there's all the documentation. You might characterize them not exactly quick and dirty, but they're quick and helpful. The accountants may come up with a term called agreed upon procedures, where the client will give them, here's what we want you to do. Here's your process. And the CPA will dutifully follow that process, but they didn't come up with, why are we doing this? That is provided to them. So knowing your way around some of these terms can be helpful.
Doug, can I interject with
yes,
another question? Another term that I just want us to clarify, we will often hear the great regulatory minds out there saying the audit should be risk-based. And I guess my question number one would be, okay, like who decides that? What does that mean? But also, like, is there another audit approach at this point? Because people have been talking about a risk-based approach to auditing whatever for 20 years. Like, is there some other thing? Is there a cookie cutter, cut and dried approach that nobody talks about? Or like, what does all that mean?
So that's a good question, and that's always worth looking into. If you're doing an audit, or if you're the subject of an audit, or if you're using an audit done by somebody else and you're relying upon it to make your decision as a compliance officer. The question is, well, what are the risks and how was that risk assessment done? Internal to a company, the internal audit department, which you get to in a minute, on a cyclical basis, standard approaches once a year will do a risk assessment of all the things that affect the entity, and they'll come up with their annual audit plan. And then as they roll out each audit, they will say, well, where do we look on this? If we're looking for Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, well, let's look at the countries where that's known to happen. If we're looking for the quality of information on vendor management, well, what is the risk? A lot of it's the criteria. Is it about the spend on the vendor? Is it about vendors who are the sole supplier for something? And if we lose that vendor, we can't make a product. So there's a lot of magic in coming up with the risk criteria and how you score or subjectively evaluate risk to land on what is it you want to look at. And in those audits, there's not infinite effort. You really kind of have to pick and choose your battles. Brings up another point that I always say, that an audit is never a guarantee. An audit is a look. It's a point in time. It's an opinion. It's a snapshot. It's never a guarantee. It's a sample. Does that help?
Yeah.
So in an audit principle, these should resonate with compliance professionals, because these are principles of what we do. Maintain integrity, independence. You should not audit your own work. Objectivity is not the same thing as independence. If you go into a subject area and say, oh, these guys are always wrong, I know I'm going to find that, you just have to be objective and look at what's in front of you. Have some professional skepticism. Always ask the why. Always ask for backup. Trust but verify. And professional judgment is always a part of an audit. This is where having experience in auditing methodology, experience in the industry, experience in whatever you're looking at really helps, because sometimes the auditor just has to make a judgment call. It's as simple as that. And that judgment call can go either way. It can be, I'm not seeing the documentation I would like, but I see how everybody operates here. I'm pretty sure things are okay, but wouldn't hurt to write some stuff down. Or it can go the other way. I'm just not convinced this is right. So the judgment angle does come into it, but the conclusions have to be based on evidence. They cannot be based upon what you thought coming into this. Every audit is different. Every client is different. So you have to use that. So
Hey,
There are a lot of different.
Doug, I got a
Yes,
quick
sir.
question for you. You know, in our pre-call, you were talking about how like audits are often misunderstood, and you've talked about how people want an audit, but of somebody else, right? Like nobody likes to get audited.
Yeah.
What do you think the single biggest misconception about audits that you'd like to clear up? And like, what do you think the cost of that misconception is to organizations? Because as you said, this is really a business process at the end of the day.
You know, I think that's a great question. Thanks for bringing it up, Nick. I think the single biggest misconception is it depends. Well, I'd say it depends, of course. I think the misconception depends upon the angle. So if you are being audited, the single biggest misperception is that people think they're being punished. And they don't understand that the audit is really there to help them. You know, when I go out to do audits, I've said, look, you know, at the end of this exercise I'm doing, there's going to be something produced called a report. And I have a saying that a report lives forever. And that report is going to go to senior management. It's going to include gaps that are going to be closed, and you can get some resources. Nobody knows your operations the way you know your operations of your job. And if there's something that's been a burr in your craw for a long time, this would be a really good time to bring it up. Because if you haven't felt the love on the things you need, now's a good time. It's going to get some love. And as the auditor, I can help you see to it that can get some love. So you can really turn that inside out and use an audit if you're being audited to your advantage. A misconception I have for companies, let's say in compliance or risk or supply chain, we're considering this vendor, they had an audit. Well, SOC 2 testing is a standard process for IT security, but vendors, let's say in the apparel field, using suppliers in different countries, we have an audit of working conditions and they got a B. Ka-chunk, everything is fine. Well, maybe they looked at using hearing protection, but the people are not sent home at the end of the day and they haven't been paid in 5 months. You know, what's the objective of the audits? I think using audits, the biggest misconception is if they've been audited and passed, we're okay. That you need to really dig into the scope of the audit, the time of the audit. The audit report was 3 years ago. There have been 2 done since then that didn't get a good grade. So don't accept an audit at face value if you're going to rely upon it for something that's important. That's a big misconception.
The way I'd answer my own question is that it's, a business is just a series of stated processes and procedures, and an audit is not something punitive, to your point. It's just a way to validate the extent to which that stated process or procedure is being followed, right? Like there's a lot of things that are sort of built on whiteboards. There's a lot of, flow charts, and this is how something is supposed to work. And we know that there's not full 100% compliance with all of those stated procedures. And so it's a normal course of action to ensure that things are being done appropriately and are there opportunities for improvement. So I think when we can have the right frame around it, we can see that this is really kind of a process, it's a process that kind of contributes to this posture of continuous improvement,
That's a good point, and it brings to mind, I was at a Big Four firm from 2002 to 2008. I joined right as Sarbanes-Oxley came out and drank from that fire hose for 6 years. And for a few years, I was on a high-profile monitorship, and a lot of the auditing muscle came back. And the first wave we did as applying audit skills, if you will, is to evaluate the design of the processes. Are the processes designed right to get you the outcome you're looking for? And the second wave is to test the processes to see when you apply the processes, when they are being applied by whoever is supposed to be applying them, do you get the desired output?
Is it a good process, and is that good process being followed? That's kind of what you're testing.
Correct.
Doug,
I
just wanted to parachute in with one observation from when I was once upon a time, I was audited, and I had I thought a very good open relationship with the auditor. But one of the listeners here said the biggest misperception is that audits are seen as punitive. And that, I think, is when the person on the receiving end thinks I, the person, am being audited and it not
Right.
the process. So I can recall I was head of a business unit. We were undergoing an audit and the internal auditor showed up and he basically said, I am not here to audit you. I don't audit people. I investigate people. And if I'm ever investigating you, you're not going to know it because you've probably done something really bad. And I was like, okay, I appreciate the candor. And then to your other point about audits are a great opportunity to get something off of your chest. At the end, he said, do you have any concerns about the larger organization in which my business unit was part? Like, well, now that you mention it, actually, I think our reporting order is totally screwy. We shouldn't be in this division at all. We should be over here in this other division. And I never would have had the chance to sound that off because basically I would have had to tell my boss, I don't want to report to you, which was going to be awkward. I didn't want to do it. But
you may have known, though, knowing you, Matt.
I probably could have. I would do it today. But it was a great opportunity to sort of bare my soul to a confessor. But also, back to the original point, you don't audit people, you investigate people, but you do audit processes. Right. And I was like, okay, I get that. And he was good and respectful, and we had a very good, productive audit.
That's a really good auditor, and that if someone were telling me that, I would translate that into what I call the language of the suits, and put that in the context of risk. With this organization structured the way it is reporting to people who do not understand the importance of the organization, don't give them free rein. There's a risk of not approving or disapproving things that limit the organization's ability to achieve its objective. And the more logical, important relationship for efficiency as effectiveness and achieving the organization's goals are a reporting relationship that goes to Department X. So now it's not like you saying, I want to report somewhere else. It's got to be put in the context of the situation as it is and how it enables or how it impairs the ability of the organization to achieve its objectives. That's easy. Now it's easy.
Faisal has two quick questions I'd love to get you guys' perspective on. Okay. The first one is, and maybe I'm going to tag one on here. At times I've heard of culture audits. Are they possible? If so, how? And where would they fall on these kinds of audits in your mind? That's the first question. Those three questions are the first question.
I'm going to put a pin in that for a minute. That goes to audit criteria, which is kind of a jellyfish there, a little bit thing. So we'll get back to that. Don't let me forget it. It's a great question.
Okay, cool.
I want to talk to the slide because there's an error on this slide and the resource that you have linked to has the error corrected. The financial audit, the internal audit bullets that are indented, they're not indented. They're different kinds of audits. The financial audit is its own thing. Internal audit, capitalized, you hear people talk about internal audit. It's a group that reports to the board. It's authorized by the board. Management cannot interfere with an internal audit that's done by the board. Now, there are also internal audits, which I differentiate as lowercase. If your company has, let's say, an ISO certification for quality, environmental management systems, whatever, that certification involves an internal audit, lowercase. That's done at the pleasure of management. Management can say yes or no at their pleasure. And internal audits, you can do your own audits of own departments, but just make sure, I found it helpful when you say internal audit, always go like timeout. Who is doing the audit? Because if you're that group reporting to the board, those audits really carry clout. So you approach that, I would suggest, with a little bit more formality and consider the audience of those audits. And other third-party audits, compliance or anybody, you can sponsor an audit that goes of other parties, and you can get audited by other parties. If they're a customer, say, are you doing what we said in our contract? So there are different kinds of audits. And in the audits, there's the audit sponsor who decided this audit was a good idea and provided the funding, the line item to do it. Then the rest of these should be familiar. There's an audit team. On the auditee side, it always helps to have a primary point of contact. And I've played the role several times of being a monitor in kind of a high profile audit, as kind of a go-between. And if the auditor is getting a little bit out of hand, I can intervene because they're afraid to stand up and I'm the independent resource. So there is the objective. Why is the audit being doing? What is being done? What are the audit standards? What is audit evidence? And we'll get back here to the question about culture. That's a good way. That had a moment with the Institute of Internal Auditors a couple years ago. I don't hear as much about it as I used to. It brings into mind some tough issues like, well, what is the criteria? That's the audit word for the thing as it you want it to exist. What do you want the culture to be? And it's kind of hard to nail that down sometimes into really objective, measurable things. If you've got measurable or objective criteria, then you can do an audit. Well, you do the risk assessment that Matt brings up. Well, where would we look to see if the culture is in line with the way we want it to be? What do we look for when we look for the audit evidence? Do we look for documents? Do we talk to people? How do we make sure we get an honest interview? Do we look at hotline rate? What is it we look at? So that's a kind of audit where I think, yeah, you could probably do it. I'm not sure that I think you could probably get some value out of doing an evaluation or assessment, because once you say audit, you have to have the audit terms, the structured audit team, the auditor. It gets a little complicated. So if you want to do a reality check on culture, there may be some lighter touch issues to get a sense of what you're going on. It goes back to what's on the screen right now. What is your objective of doing that? And that determines how elaborate you make the it that you do.
So it sounds like what you're saying. Go ahead, Matt. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I've thought about this a lot, and I've written about it once or twice over the years. And it's funny that you said, Doug, that maybe you assess the culture, because that's kind of where I was going with my thoughts as I was listening to you, that I think it is an easier process to assess whether you have a bad culture as opposed to, do you have the culture we want? I don't know what that means. And for a large multinational company, you could have several different subcultures at the same time, and that's okay. But there are certain symptoms of a bad culture that you'd want to think about. And I've had people ask before, okay, so what's the thing that I actually look at? And for example, you could look at something like employee turnover. Is it getting higher? Is it higher than my peer companies? Percentage of employees who quit without doing an exit interview, which is kind of sort of like, I don't care if you people drop dead. Here's my middle finger. I'm out.
Exactly.
If you have a lot of that, that's a big red flag. You could look at incidents specifically of retaliation, because that is management or somebody else saying, we're going to put it to this person who's trying to do a right thing, red flag. The other one that people have told me about is internal audit findings that go unaddressed for too long, because management is saying, we know we have a problem, and you know what, we don't care. We're not going to fix it. That does not necessarily mean that you have a bad culture, or the absence of them means you have a good culture, but they're indicators that something somewhere is wrong. If you had all 5 of them, or whatever I just mentioned there, I think it would probably be a bad place to work. But, things that you look at versus taking an employee sentiment survey, or what people say on blind.com or Glassdoor or something, they always complain on those websites. I'm not sure how important.
There's, maybe I hope that was for audits and not for both of us. But another little misconception is, if we don't know, if internal audit findings have not been addressed, there I'd pick at the words a little bit, because internal audit, capital I, capital A, or any internal audit, lowercase, I've seen auditors come up with some recommendations that were just really trivial and just not worth the effort. I think it's one thing to not do all of them. Management can accept the risk if they understand the risk of not taking action, and that should be documented so that the findings from an audit should not be ignored. They should be addressed, either dealt with, fixed, implemented, or the company will affirmatively accept the risk. That's okay. We operate in a world of risk. To pivot back to the audit question on culture, I mentioned criteria. I'm not sure I have a slide on this, but one thing I cover a lot is what is the criteria? What is it you're comparing against? A compliance audit, we all kind of understand that. You look at the regulations to see, are we in compliance? There are also industry standards for what you do in your industry or for a particular product. There are guidance documents, the DOJ guidance on an effective compliance program. It's not a regulation, it's guidance, but it might as well be a regulation. OECD has due diligence guidelines for operating in third world countries. So if you're operating there, that's essentially widely recognized. You can use that as a criteria. I'm an author of the COSO document for internal controls over sustainability reporting. And I have on good authority that the Big Four are taking that and incorporating that into their audit criteria for greenhouse gas emissions reporting. And here's a news flash. COSO has just released a document on internal controls for generative AI. It's really good. And like the COSO ICSR document, sustainability reporting, this document is free. I don't have a link to that on my website yet, but I'll have it there by end of day tomorrow. It's on the COSO.org website. So that's criteria. How are we doing? I need to audit or evaluate or look at how we're approaching AI. And if you don't know where to start on how to do the audit, that can help form criteria. One thing that I see missed a lot is the terms and conditions of contracts with other business partners. There are terms to a loan. There are terms for providers of capital, for customers, for suppliers. And we all just think we're in compliance, but you don't really know until there's a problem. So, coming up with the criteria is non-trivial. Okay. And there's communications and reporting. Nothing should come as a surprise. Internal audit director. Okay, so let's go here. On audits done by others, just look and see for follow-on documents of the objectives meet what you're trying to do. For auditees, it really pays to be ready. I have put together a document that I call Auditees' Bill of Rights. If you're being audited, here's what you should expect from the auditor. And this is a new post on my website. I think often auditees feel like they're the victim and they don't feel empowered.
Right.
You are empowered, just up to you to use it. So here's some criteria as a kind of reminder to say, easy on the marketing, no scope creep, no surprises at the ending, treat our people with respect. And, every auditor's problem with auditors, they put their nose in documents and they don't realize there are people in the room. There
That's
are
right.
operations that we can look at, get some comfort from all kinds of evidence, not just the documents. There are people here. There are visuals here. You can look at our housekeeping. That's meaningful. So don't get...
Yeah, we just dropped this link in the chat for this thing. Joe, I don't know if you can drop it in again, but I think this is really great. And what I liked about the idea for this session is that now we've sort of framed out the context, the right terms, how these things kind of work. For the back end of this conversation, I really want to talk about how we as compliance can utilize these internal audits that are maybe coming from us or that we are maybe subject to in a more strategic way. To your point, Doug, there's a lot of times an auditor has their head in the books. They're just trying to get through their work plan. And they might sort of myopically be looking at a particular process, not understanding that broader context. And so what I like about this Bill of Rights is it gives some agency to those of us who might be auditees to help kind of influence and control this process. Like sit in at least the front seat if we're not in the driver's seat, at least sit in the front seat as opposed to the back seat of that audit to, again, use this for the unified goal of the organization, which is to improve, right? Like the whole reason that ethics and compliance exist within an organization is to try to reduce the volatility of the operations, right? There's all these business processes. There's varying degrees of adherence to those policies and procedures. To the extent that we can influence that, the engine rattles less, the business is more quote unquote professionalized, there's less risk in the organization that ultimately ends up translating into more enterprise value. It makes it more clear for the case that we want to make around our ROI or the impact that we're having on those business objectives. And I think that this auditees Bill of Rights is a great reminder on, to us that might be auditees in a particular situation on what we should expect and what we should fight for in that process. Let's kind of talk about that a little bit.
That's a great segue. That's a great topic. And somebody in the questions asked about how do we put compliance and internal audit together, maybe internal audit and risk to improve the health of our organizations, let's say. If I have yet to really encounter an organization that has a complete inventory of all the audits that are done or that they rely upon during the course of a year. They don't even know because they're being audited at operations level, at internal audit level. And whenever there's a gap identified and somebody's expect to close it, I contend that's kind of compliance. So compliance can reach out and help develop an inventory of all the audits that are being done, that are regularly scheduled, that are surprise audits done by clients or customers or business partners. I like the right to audit in a contract with a third party. You need to have a right to audit in there. And sometimes that can even be a surprise audit so they don't clean the house before you show up. And to start from the life cycle of audits, if you will, in the audit planning session for internal audit at the beginning of the year, there's a way that compliance can muscle their way to the table and help with that risk assessment because you, with the hotline, with get boots on the ground, the relationships you have in a company, internal audit may have kind of an isolated view on what the risks are. You can really help steer the whole audit plan. For other audits that are being done voluntarily, you can input your own sense of risk and discomfort. And because compliance knows the business, a lot of times there's another misconception or problem that auditing is usually looking in the rearview mirror. The company is driving forward, so do we have the right resources to meet our business objectives in our 3-year or 5-year plan? Compliance just inherently has a sense of that because we know, and the auditors are looking backwards so that if you can turn that vision around and tug all the audit universe of your organization to be a little more forward looking, that can really help. And risk, they may not be looking at it in that perspective. Compliance knows.
Yeah, compliance can be that bridge and should be that bridge to your exact point. Many times, we should have the most context about the organization. Out of any department, I would make that argument, maybe except for the CEO, but also maybe not the CEO because there's just a bunch of empty suits. You know what I mean? Just kidding. But we understand the nuance on how processes are being handled, where those risk hotspots are. And we can do a lot, to your point, to influence those auditors and to help make sure that the scope doesn't creep or help them understand what the business realities are. Because to the extent that, an auditor is maybe like a third line defense, we're at least one line forward on that. So we should be, exhibiting the agency to embed and sort of influence with more of that context to help drive that forward in the right way.
Doug, let me jump in with a question from one of the listeners here that I thought was really good, and I might put my own spin on it too. But the original question from the listener was, how would you approach things if you are coming in as an internal audit director? The internal audit function is not as mature as it was portrayed Sure, that never happens when people take a new job and they find out it was not as promised in the job description. But anyways, you come in, you find out that the internal audit capabilities are not what you would have wanted. What do you do? I mean, can you even start with something like auditing your own internal audit capacity to understand what you can or can't do? I don't know how often that comes up, or, who looks at the audit function, but it's a fair point that the audit function itself might not have much capacity. And how do you figure that out? And then what's possible?
So what's your spin on it, Matt?
That this probably happens a lot. But no, yeah. I do think that internal auditors, one thing I've noticed for a long time is certainly within the public company realm, and probably any business that's trying to treat itself like a public company, there is this drag that you spend so much time on internal controls, financial reporting, Sarbanes-Oxley controls, that it's like it keeps dragging you back from all the fun stuff, from all the cool stuff, from all of the risk advisory. And you, internal auditor, you have so much that you'd like to do, but you have a day job testing and documenting internal controls for SOX audits, which nobody's idea of a fun time. And like you're boxed in, and there's a struggle to be able to try and tackle that, square it away somehow, so that you can do more value-added stuff.
Yeah, I'll frame it. That's helpful, because I was thinking, like, if compliance is getting audited by internal audit, it's really better framed as compliance as a partner with internal audit. Like, how do you rely and work with them? Internal audit, I have to say, and Sarbanes-Oxley really kind of put the crimp on internal audit because they had to do internal controls over financial reporting. There weren't other resources in the company, so that got tossed to internal audit, and a lot of the risk assessment stuff kind of went away. And I'm not sure if it's ever come back. Yeah. So internal audit has struggled. I think in many ways that their role is not understood. They're not good advocates for themselves. And sometimes the board is just asleep. They're looking at other things, so they don't look at that relationship could use improvement in a lot of areas. So if you're a compliance officer and you'd like to work with a competent, well-staffed, funded, savvy internal audit group, and it's just not there, that's a problem. That's a limitation. What do you do about it? Well, if you can forge relationships, how are you? Internal Audit just published, IIA just published a new global internal audit standards that are kind of a nice refresh from the old Red Book, as they called it. Have conversations. So what are you doing to meet the current GIAS? How do you do risk assessment? We're seeing some risks that we don't see covered. So can we help you with the risk assessment? And, you can only get so far with that. At a session I did a few weeks ago, somebody says, a vendor goes in, we keep trying to get the internal audit department to grow up and to do better things. And year after year, all they audit is travel and expenses. And, that's a damn shame. Where is the board for that? When you look at what's being sponsored for the year, how do you change that? I don't have the answer to it. You can try a couple of different avenues. I think the soft approach first is probably the way to go. And if you find that they're just completely in over your heads, I don't know what you do.
So here's another question from a listener that I think is great. Some auditors argue that fraud detection is not part of their job. Do you agree?
I saw that question come in. That's a good one. The internal audit group, internal audit standards should require a fraud brainstorming session in the planning of every audit. So consideration of fraud should be part of the annual audit plan, but for each audit, the Red Book standards, now replaced, required a fraud brainstorming session during each audit, and then either look at some processes, maybe do some testing, but you had to at least consider it. And I co-authored some guidance document that mapped to that, and with the new standards, all that was taken down. I still have a hard copy if anybody wants one. But they should at least look for it. Now, some limitations there are if you have an audit team that has only ever audited travel and expenses, and now you're looking at cybersecurity for vendor partners, you really need to talk to people who know the topic to see where could fraud occur. And you need to have specialists and people on the team to steer the risk assessment, the procedures, to look at documents and listen to people and say, is my spidey sense going off or is this okay? So it should be part of every internal audit to not test for it a little bit, but at least see if you uncover something that, to your point, Matt, should be handed off to an investigator. You're not going to prove it, but you can detect situations where there is a high risk of fraud or it appears there could be some evidence of fraud. I think another aspect there is that fraud, in my view, yeah.
I just wanted to say, I go back and forth on this because I can remember I once had a conversation with a senior auditor at a Big Four firm, and she just flat out said, look, I audit a $10 billion company. If somebody is embezzling $200,000 a year, it's like, I'm never going to find it. It's not material to the company, even though it's material to the person who's skimming 200 grand a year.
Right.
And I got that. On the other hand, I was thinking, if somebody is committing fraud by doing round trip revenue recognition, where they book all the sales on the 30th of the month, they meet their quotas, and then everything gets refunded on the 2nd, it's like, that's more about the timing of when revenue is recognized. And yeah, that is your job to try and figure out that process stinks and it should be fixed. So I do think it's absolutely their job to try and assess the potential for fraud, because your controls are as loosey-goosey as they come. But she's not wrong to say, I can't detect it at a large company because most of the embezzlement frauds are not going to be material to the company, even though they're material to the one who's lining their pockets. Like that was a fair point. Yeah.
So that's a situation where I would say that the design of the audit can look at the design of the controls, and if there is leakage or weaknesses in the controls, and if you have the time and resources to test some of that and do some sampling. An audit is not a proof, but the thing that you found, she's correct in that they may or may not find it. I would contend they should not be blind to it. There at least has to be some effort to look for that. And the other overlay I would say on fraud is that it almost always I hear it come up in an economic or financial context, like you just described, misstatement on the financial statements. I contend that fraud is any intentional misrepresentation or omission that is to obtain advantage at the expense of another. And a lot of times it's money, some directly, sometimes it's money indirectly. And I use example in companies marketing their products as eco-friendly, or this product is made with recycled content. That can get you in cap space at Target and increase your sales at the expense of somebody else who's selling the same thing, but they haven't put that on the package or in their commitment for the contract. And there have been some cases, enforcement at the government and companies taking their suppliers off the shelves because they found out they've been lied to. And they're in the middle between the supplier and the customer, and they don't want to take that risk. So I consider that fraud. You're getting advantage at the expense of somebody else with erroneous misrepresentations, and you know it.
Which will increase with the rise of AI. I could see things like, especially in services business, customers who are in fact just AI agents that look like they're doing things, but there's no actual person doing a thing. But you're telling private equity investor that we have customers from here to New Jersey, and you have AI bots looking like customers from here to New Jersey. That's fraud.
We hate fraud. You know what I mean?
But it's all about for the auditor. I agree that it's more about looking at the processes to make sure fraud is difficult to do, not that it,
Yes, sir.
are you detecting it or not? My auditor friend said, look, if I stumble across it, that's great, I'll report it. But I'm only going to stumble across it. She's never going to be able to go and look for it in a vast corporate organization.
And I think it's important to recognize the different lens that compliance is looking at the business through relative to audit. I mean, we're kind of, underscoring this difference right now. It's kind of similar to compliance versus legal. Legal has a different sort of priority set, or a different thing that they're solving for at its base level. And we don't want any fraud in the organization, right? Irrespective of sort of materiality, we want to be able to stamp that out. If an auditor, what I'm getting at is it's easy to kind of assume, kind of to something that Doug said before, it's easy to just assume that, well, the audit is my kind of sense of security. If they pass the audit, we're good to go. There's no kind of issues here. Well, there may be issues, to your point, Matt, where the fraud is not reaching the materiality threshold and it's not going to be uncovered in the audit. So I think that underscores the importance to something that was said multiple times in the chat, and that, you guys said earlier, this partnership, this collaboration with audit can help kind of fill in some of those gaps by, again, providing some of that context and ensuring that they're able to see around the curve, because they don't have that context within, maybe a particular business process or a particular region. They're really kind of executing their plan. And if what I'm saying is not resonating with you, then you're not listening. Just kidding. If what I'm saying isn't resonating, I'm just trying to kind of draw the distinction between a sort of well-tenured auditor who kind of understands the lay of the land and understands the nuance in the position, and and somebody who's maybe kind of a staff level auditor who's really working out of a lot of book knowledge. I think that's where we can really help influence a less mature, internal audit function by providing that context through that collaboration.
I would encourage folks to take blinders off in just terms of the expansive world of auditing. We're comfortable. I mean, we see internal audit show up at meetings. There's the lowercase internal audit done for ISO and standards and product conformity and the like. The audit universe, I would suggest, is a lot bigger than you think in your organizations. And you can run into issues, good or bad, with the internal audit department if you have one. There are a lot of companies with one internal auditor. So it's and no budget. So they just can't do an audit to the degree of competence or effectiveness because it's no fault of their own. They just don't have the experience or the budget. But at an operational level, at a division level, done by customers, done by people who provide capital, there's a lot more audits out there than you think. And I think it's kind of a shame that I haven't encountered a company yet that has an inventory of audits. I've encountered situations in doing their audits and purchase of sale of companies for asset transfers. And people make representations when they sell a business, we're in compliance. Turns out you're not. Costs a lot of money. So you can go back and reclaim money. There are a lot of audits going on out there that you might not know. I've also seen situations where two auditors from two different firms at two parts of the business come up with findings that contradict each other. So what are you going to do? The auditor, it has recommendations. Sometimes they're strong, sometimes they're suggestions, but at the end of the day, it's your business. It's your objective that you're trying to meet. You're trying to help the company plan for the future, and just take all these. They're important, but take them with a grain of salt. You can be critical of an audit. That's all right. In fact, that helps.
Yeah, an audit's not a silver bullet. I mean, to your point, every business process is a little different. I'm just kind of thinking back to a financial audit that our company had. The auditor came and they were asking a bunch of questions, and they were normal questions to ask. This is a financial audit. They were normal questions to ask, and it was incumbent on me to give them the right context so that they didn't arrive at that wrong, at a wrong conclusion.
So I'm curious if anybody has I'll ask the attendees to put in the chat something they learned today, or a good reminder, or an insight that came to mind they hadn't thought of before. We have such a talented audience that feedback is always really good.
Yeah, we'd love to hear that.
Any more questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My last question is, man, I feel like we could run this long. I don't want to run it too long. This is a good question. If a compliance professional leaves today and does just like one thing differently in their next audit, what do you think that should be?
In the next audit that they sponsor, or the next
audit that they're a part of, whether they're as an auditee or as a sponsor of an audit, either one, or maybe both.
I think, I hope they're doing it now, but I think always go back to the objective of the audit. That should be the aim, and tie the objective of the audit to the objective of the organization. You know, if the objective of the audit is this way because it's somebody's pet issue and the organization is going here, the audit's going to be a flop. The objective of the audit can always help influence the scope of the audit, understand the scope and don't stray from that, but it all gets back to the objective. And I would think also to keep in mind as you're fashioning an audit, authorizing an audit, participating in an audit, whatever the role, think a couple steps down the road on where the audit itself is going to go. The audit is helping the company meet an objective. What resonates with you? What would you like to insert to that process that helps you in your job,
right,
and helps you help the company meet the objective? So just like what we discussed a few minutes ago, well, this is wrong or that's wrong, like why, so what? There's the what, what's the so what? And put that in language that the suits can understand. If it shows up in front of the board, they would look at it and go like, you're right, that's a problem. We need to fix that. Go do it, and here's the money. So always, I think you're always ahead of the game if you keep the eye on the objectives, short-term and long-term, and put things in context that the business can understand.
Yeah, and I think at the start end of that, to your point, I think that's a great takeaway. At the start end of that audit, making sure that we're on the same page around what the objective of the audit is in the context of those business objectives can do a lot that can pull, forward, so to speak, a lot of, potential chaos and a lot of misalignment that won't show up until, the back end of that audit. And, there's a great sort of thematic, element to what you just said, because that's advice that's, we're always giving to compliance professionals. Like everything we're doing should tie out to some business objective, or we should be able to make some kind of a dotted line case toward those business objectives. And so making sure that we're all looking at the same, North Star, so to speak, can do a lot to make sure that we're not kind of rowing in the wrong directions here. So with that, let's get a massive emoji explosion for the one and only Doug Howman. For the one and only Matt Kelly, thank you guys so much for this conversation. Audits are a reality.
Appreciate you guys for everything you do.
Yeah,
you're great.
Yeah, audits are a reality. It's something that we all have to deal with, and it's something that no, we're not doing audits. We love audits. Okay, that was a joke. Okay, we need to just use them to our advantage to, again, drive more enterprise value ultimately by reducing the volatility in the organization. So join us next Tuesday for a special edition with Leslie Bowles, where we're going to be going through the 2026 Healthcare Benchmark Report. We're going to be talking about practical implications and how you can improve your program and drive more speak up. Make sure that channel, that critical channel of risk intelligence is working for you. And then next Thursday, Matt Kelly is back, and we're going to be talking about workplace investigation failures, some of the biggest mistakes you can make. So you are not going to want to miss either one of those. Thank you all. Love you all. See you next week.